David Sachs has warned about World War III every single week since the start of the invasion, outside of like a few. Every single week since the invasion, he has been screaming at the top of his lungs that the world is about to explode. And here we are, still in the world. The decision has been made. So for those of you who don't know, President Joe Biden made the decision to allow long-range strikes to hit Russia. And when we say long-range strikes, let me rephrase this a little bit, because this is how it's being reported. But I feel like some people don't know what that means, because I saw some people saying, "Oh my God, we're gonna bomb Moscow," and people, I guess people just legitimately do not know, and that's my good faith interpretation. So, the missiles that have been approved by the United States to be used against Russia in Russian territory for the first time cannot reach Moscow. They can reach within about 300 kilometers inside the Russian border. So we're talking, the Kursk region, which it'll probably be very helpful with. We're talking, all of these border regions right here for about, like, from here to say about here at the deepest possible length, you're still another, like, 300 kilometers away from Moscow, maybe 250. So no, there's no firebombs falling upon Moscow. They're not going to use an American missile to launch and take out the Kremlin and go kill a bunch of assembly members in the Duma, or, make the Golden Domes catch a flame. That's not happening. What these missiles are going to be largely used against is likely going to be ammunition storage. It's going to be troop concentrations, particularly in the Kursk area, because fighting in the Kursk area right now is very, very brutal, and the Russians are doing everything they can to push out the Ukrainians by the time Trump's inaugurated, so the Ukrainians have no leverage to come to the negotiating table with to trade land for land, so the Russians can occupy as much as they want and not have to trade anything for it and make no concessions. So troop concentrations in this area, and also air bases. Now, I will say that the air bases portion of this has been blunted. The fact that we took so long to make this decision, and did not make this decision, say, a year and a half ago, where I think it's kind of hard to argue that we would have had a different outcome than the one we're getting now when it comes to, response from the Russians. I think maybe you could say that Trump being the next incumbent gives them more cover, because the Russians could look at this and say, even if we were going to escalate immensely, we're definitely not going to start any crazy conflict with the West, because, Trump's going to be in office in 2 months, so why not just wait it out? Either way, because we waited so long, the Russians had enough time to bring the majority of their air assets back from the 300-kilometer range, meaning that only about 10% of the air assets are still left. 90% have already been withdrawn out of range of these missiles. That does not mean they can't still have an impact. And if American weapons are also approved, as well as Storm Shadows, and maybe even French longer-range missiles, by the way, it's more mid-range missiles than long-range missiles, because I think when some people hear long-range missiles, they're expecting explosions like all the way over here or whatever. The Ukrainians can already go pretty deep with drones, actually like 3, 4, or 5 times as deep with drones. So if they really just wanted to show that they could do that, they could do that already. It's the question of payload and how much destruction they can bring that deep. But the Ukrainians can still use it, and if they can get all of these approvals for Western weapons, not only ATACMS, but also Storm Shadow, which it looks like we did get approval for Storm Shadow. You can see here, Storm Shadow strikes are being made in this region over here, which is actually the region next to Kursk. The region, originally the report was that these long-range missiles could only be used in Kursk. And so this was a way for the Americans to kind of hedge their bets a little bit, to make it look like, okay, we're going to allow long-range strikes, but we'll only allow it in the area where the Ukrainians are currently fighting so they can retain their leverage. But the Storm Shadows are already outside of the region. And so it could be that for American weapons, it's approved only for Kursk, but for other European weapons, they have permission to approve it for other areas, which then gives it a little bit more diplomatic flexibility. It could be that they said it was Kursk, or the rumor is it was Kursk, and the reason they did that was so, they would be able to have some diplomatic cover, so there would be some surprise since the fact that this strike was going to be approved, or these strikes were going to be approved, was already in the press for quite a bit. Anyway, it has been approved, and the Ukrainians have started using them, and Zelenskyy made a statement about it, and his statement basically amounted to, the missiles will speak for themselves. That he's not going to confirm any strikes, that he's not going to deny any strikes, he's not going to point anywhere and said, that wasn't us, that was us, that wasn't us, that was us. He simply is going to let the missiles make impact, destroy their targets, and let them speak for themselves. Now, the reason we took so long was because of a fear in the Biden administration expressed by Jake Sullivan and others, possibly Lloyd Austin when it comes to supply issues and stuff like that, about the threat of escalation versus strategic benefit. Now, with the Kursk invasion, I think the argument about strategic benefit has increased. I think there was always a strategic benefit in using these to tear up the air bases. I think there was always a strategic benefit in using these to destroy ammunition storage facilities. But there was not a convincing enough argument that Washington would accept. I think there was definitely arguments that it was worth the escalatory potential. But now, due to the diplomatic cover of a Trump administration coming in 2 months, and Biden largely being a lame duck president who can't approve more aid, so he has to make what he has left count, and what he has left to do is permissions from the executive branch to ship over the last of the approved aid, and to give permissions that frees up Ukrainian firepower to hit targets that they haven't been able to hit before. And that's what this does. And due to the fact that the Russians have set all the same disincentives that they had before about using nuclear devices when it comes to angering the Indians who they are reliant on for trade, angering the Chinese who they are reliant on to trade, the possible response from the West, as one angle is, oh, if they nuke something, then it's going to scare the West into submission. The other angle is Western military planners say, if we are scared into submission, that's going to encourage this behavior, and then we have normalized the reintroduction of atomic weapons into traditional interstate warfare. We cannot allow that. We must have a reciprocal response. And so the Russians, facing the threat of, economic difficulty with losing their main trading partners, the possibility of a response from a coalition of over 1 billion people with all of the problems the Russians have, that's still a lot more purchasing power, manpower, and, military power than they can currently bring to force. And so all the same disincentives exist today as they did months ago, except for the Trump one. The Trump one is a new added cover that I think, plus the fact, the pressure of the next administration just coming in, pushed the administration finally over the line to make this approval. Oh, and there, of course, is the issue that if you start intercontinental nuclear war, the Russian elites lose all their money, and you wouldn't want to do that. Anyway, the approval has been made. If you were to ask me what type of impact this is going to have, due to the fact it took so long, it's going to be limited, and due to the fact that they have a shortage of supply of these types of munitions, that's also going to be limiting the effect. It's not that they don't have them, they do, and they are probably being shipped more right now, but they don't have enough to have the biggest potential impact. And with all of the munitions that Ukraine has, the biggest issue is supply. And so it's going to really be a question of how far can they go with the supplies that they have. And I think the biggest area it's going to have a direct impact in right now is Kursk. The Ukrainians want to hold this area until January. They've already lost 40% of what they controlled at the peak of their occupation. They've been pushed out from Kornevo. They've been pushed out through these fields. The Russians have liberated some of these villages, and now they're pushing harder here. Now, a lot of these assaults are coming with devastating Russian losses. Devastating mechanized losses. You're getting tons of videos out of Russian POWs getting captured in the bushel. And the reason I'm describing it as in the bushel is because, I don't know how you describe 26 POWs in one assault. Look at this. Look at this. That's a lot of guys. But the reason why they're throwing all these guys into assault is because they don't want to sit down for any potential negotiation with the oncoming Trump administration and have the Ukrainians retaining leverage. Because if they do, if you're a quote-unquote deal maker, even though I haven't seen much of that from the Trump administration. If you are one, you're not going to ignore the fact that you have this leverage. You're not. And so the Russians, despite the losses, are determined to push them out for political reasons. And people might say, oh, what about the strategic? War is an extension of politics. If the Russians want to get the best deal for them, they're going to have to pursue war aims that are in line with their political aims. I mean, this is kind of basic, but Clausewitz said that war is an extension of politics by other means. This is an example of that. So that's where it's going to have the most immediate direct impact. It could also have an impact on ammunition storage. It could also have an impact on supply lines. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to say about this when it comes to describing what's going on. Oh, here's I wonder if we can watch a video here. Oh, no, this is just a geolocation. I don't want to have to open so. Oh, here it is. Here is a Russian experiencing storm shadow strikes for the very first time. Oh, it says it was actually in the Kursk region. I could have sworn there was something outside of Kursk in the Bryansk region. Maybe that was ATACMS. I'll have to check that afterwards. Fact is, there was mid to long range strikes outside of Kursk. I don't know if it was Storm Shadow or ATACMS.
What, блядь? Взрывают сейчас. Вон там дым идет. Что они там забомбили? Еще один прилет летит. Ебать нахрен. Вот это взрывы, а? Серег, хрен его знает. Мы, наверное, сейчас ломанемся отсюда. Ебать, бля. Пиздец, хрен, я здесь сейчас, бля. Ебать, бля, пиздец.
Just doesn't stop.
Ебать, блядь, пиздец, ебать. Дым идет, сука, везде. Прямо на помаре хреначат, бля. Не знаю, бля. Хуй знает, где сейчас пацаны там. Ебать нахрен сюда. Вот это взрывы. Именно Марина наша взрывает, бля, именно.
Okay, you get the idea. It's again and again and again and again. We can play a little bit more, but you get the idea. Okay, it's again and again and again and again. 3-day operation. Special military operation. Very special military operation. So yeah, we're going to see a lot more videos like that in the near future. How much is dependent on supply, and how much and this is just me being blunt, how much Western countries are not only willing to give up certain number of their stockpiles, but how much they're willing to say, I'm willing to have a short term, due to the crucialness of this specific period in the war for the next 2 to 3 months, I'm willing to have a temporary reduction in military readiness and oversupplying the Ukrainians with this right now to help support them holding the land in Kursk, to giving them the best deal possible. That's what the United States should do. That is what the British should do. That is what the French should do. And what the Germans should do is immediately confirm that they're going to send over the Taurus missile, because there has never been any better time for them to do it, except for yesterday or the day before. But the second best is, of course, today. We still haven't heard any movement from the Germans on approving the mid to long range Taurus missile, which has decent penetrating power, by the way, and could be used on other targets like the Kerch Bridge. I don't know if it would knock it down, but it could be. But that's something the Germans should do in the immediate future. Okay. We all know the basic bare-bone facts about what happened. We all know the basic bare-bone facts about why the Russians would probably not nuke anything in response to this, given the political time frame that they're working under, what they're expecting from the next administration, and all of the disincentives that have existed since the start of the war. Okay, what did the Russians do in response to this? Because they had to do something in response to this. Well, they did do something in response to this. They fired missiles at Ukraine. Now, let me be clear. This is not like any missiles, not like a Kinzhal or many of the missiles they have been firing at Ukraine. This is a intermediate range ballistic missile. Now, a lot of people online have been saying, much to, you know, the outrage of weapons specialists, I guess, people who like nerd out about this stuff, that it is an intercontinental ballistic missile. So a missile that could be fired from, say, Siberia to Montana to knock out their missile silos. No. I've heard this from Ukrainian officials, and I've seen this a lot on Twitter, but it's probably an intermediate range ballistic missile. And I think it's for two reasons. Number one, it seems like a waste of an intercontinental ballistic missile to be firing it at Ukraine when it's right there. Like, Russia's directly connected to Ukraine, whereas in the intercontinental ballistic missiles, so for targets way, 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 way far away, you would probably want to save those for if you have to hit a target way, way, way far away. And they're also more expensive to make intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so it would really just be, you could get the same effect with an intermediate range one or a different missile. It would just be to kind of strut your stuff and show you could use it, which seems like an expensive way to get the same effect from something cheaper. And so I do believe is an intermediate range ballistic missile. And that is what the American government has said. And that is what the Russians have now said. Putin offers West warning as he confirms new missile use. This was on the city of Dnipro, by the way. After hours of speculation about what Russia used in its attacks on the central Ukrainian city of Dnipro this morning, we arrived at an answer when President Vladimir Putin spoke in a surprise address to the nation. On Russian state TV, Putin confirmed that Moscow had used a new intermediate-range ballistic missile, capable of attacking targets at a speed of 2.5 to 3 kilometers per second. This is different from what Ukraine had claimed earlier, as its president and foreign ministry alleged that the attack was carried out by an intercontinental ballistic missile. U.S. officials threw cold water on those claims throughout the day. Had it been confirmed, it would have marked the first use of an ICBM in the war. The Russian president also offered a warning to the West, saying that Moscow was ready for any developments, adding that today's strike was carried out in response to Ukraine's use of American and British long-range weaponry. The BBC's Paul Adams spoke with people in Ukraine about how the West, in particular America, figures to the ongoing war. Again, then it goes to the BBC's coverage, yada, yada, yada. Also, interesting, the United States apparently briefed Ukraine ahead of the Russian missile attack, which is good. It is a good thing to give them warning. The White House has confirmed that the U.S. is aware of Russia launching an intermediate-range ballistic missile against Ukraine. We briefed Ukraine and our close allies and partners in recent days to help them prepare. She refused to be drawn on specific details of the attack under Russia, but adds that the U.S. has been sending hundreds of additional missiles to Ukraine to strengthen its air defenses. When pressed by reporters on whether this would amount to an escalation of the conflict, she laid the blame squarely on Moscow. The escalation at every turn, at every step, is coming from Russia. Okay. There is, I believe, some footage of this online that you could probably see. I don't know if I have any of that pulled up. I have some of the aftermath pulled up of the damage. From what we know, there was 2 people who were injured from the missile attack. Here is some damage from last night that you can see. And here is video of the attack itself. So yeah, that's a lot of strikes. The way it's being talked about now is that these are multiple reentry vehicles. The way it works is that the missile gets fired up, and it goes over its target, it breaks apart, and then smaller warheads break off, and then go down and strike the different targets that it needs to strike. That's the way it's being talked about right now. It looks like it. It does look like it. But I can't say for sure because I didn't look at, the different missile pieces, and I don't want to claim anything. But I could say that it very well could be that. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means that Russia could be opening a few more weapons up to bomb Ukraine. But when it comes to tactically or strategically, how much does this change? I I don't really know. I mean, I don't really think it changes all that much. I mean, when I looked at the damage, that same damage could have been done with a Kinzhal. And I mean, those missiles have struck cities like all across the country, like Kharkiv and Kiev. What they used to strike that children's hospital in Kiev, they could have used to strike Dnipro. And so I think it's a response that the Kremlin grabbed for as they were looking to do something because they didn't want to like escalate to the atomic level. And so they had to look what was in their arsenal. And this was a new weapon that they hadn't used in their arsenal. And so they fired it at Dnipro to show that, look, we can bring new weapons too. But let's be clear. The line that has been crossed here is very different than the line that the Russians are trying to cross here or make a show of crossing. The line that has been crossed is that now a whole new swath of territory is, to put it bluntly, ripe for the picking for these longer, mid to longer range missiles provided by the West, where they were not approved before, and the only weapon that the Ukrainians really could use was trying to strap explosives to a drone that can go pretty far, but doesn't pack that much of a punch. And so when they're hitting these oil refineries and they're hitting these air bases, they do some damage. Sometimes if they get lucky or a bunch get through, they can even do a moderate amount of damage. But they just do not have the payload in order to do the amount of damage that they desire. And so this has the speed that's going to make it less likely to be intercepted and has the payload that the Ukrainians desire and are now able to fire it 300 kilometers deep into Russia. That's a range. That's making a lot more targets in play at a crucial point where the Russians are trying to push the Ukrainians out of Kursk. I don't know if this will be decisive in helping the Ukrainians defend Kursk, but I think it'll probably help. Whereas this, yes, they now have a new weapon that they could fire at Dnipro, but also let's be clear, number one, these weapons are expensive. Number two, the Russians have been saving up on their missiles for the winter anyway. At least that's what I think they're saving it up for. They've been holding them back from recent air attacks. And so they were probably going to let loose on major Ukrainian cities and electrical infrastructure in the near future. And so I just don't know how. I think that the strikes over the border help the Ukrainians more than this new weapon being rained upon Dnipro. I just think that's the case. Okay. So now, where do we go from here? Let's talk about the takes. Okay? Why the hell is nobody talking about this? From Kira Won't Miss. Question mark. Russia says Ukraine attacked it using U.S. long-range missiles. Signals it's ready for nuclear response. I'm starting with this one because this one's the easiest to get out of the way, okay? I'm seeing a bunch of posts like this. People are talking about it. You're just not paying attention, okay? Just because you just tuned into the news doesn't mean not anyone else was tuning into the news. Just because you started following the topic doesn't mean nobody is talking about it. It just means you're not informed of the topic. You just learned about it. You screen capped a headline for a story you weren't following and then posted it online. And then when you read this, having no context, you hear a bunch of big scary words meant to fearmonger, and you're immediately grabbed up, getting snagged on the claw machine of fearmongering and hoisted away as a random Twitter account. This person's like nobody politically. They're just like a random Twitter account. But I wanted to use this post because I think it showed most accurately, part and parcel, this problem, this issue I have with this type of thinking. Let's go forward, though, because Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia, he had some things to say. He's a Putin lackey. He's actually one of the few that has been with Putin since the campaign trail back at the late 90s, early 2000s, where if you go watch old footage of Putin in his campaign office, you'll be like, that one's been exiled, that one's been exiled, that one's been exiled, that one's dead, that one's been exiled, that one fled to the West and is now a dissident, that one's been exiled. But Dmitry Medvedev is one of the few that's actually still there. Now, he responded to all of this, as he usually does in a drunken stupor, assumed drunken stupor. Russia's new nuclear doctrine means NATO fired against our country could be deemed an attack by the bloc on Russia. Russia could retaliate with WNDs against Kyiv, and he spells it wrong, and key NATO facilities wherever they're located. This means World War III. I'm in Kiev right now. I am fine. I'm not on fire. Dmitry Medvedev is a fearmonger. His job is to fearmonger while not being taken seriously. Is to go out there, act like a clown so he's not opposition to Putin, while also being an attack dog for the regime. This is just Kremlin talking point after Kremlin talking point with no words behind it that are actionable. Because Dmitry Medvedev doesn't have the power to make these decisions, which is why he can get loose in the tongue when it comes to such rhetoric. Look what the Tate brothers had to say. We are relying on Russia to save the world. The current U.S. administration does not represent us, as we proved in our election. Please do not let these war hawks provoke you. Let the consequences of their stupidity be paid for and fixed by our new peaceful administration. Russia, cross. Okay. You're going to need pliers to get his face out of his taint. Because it is so far up there. He's going to be Rudolph the Brown-Nosed Reindeer when you get him out there, okay? Not good. No bueno. Let's start from the beginning. We are relying on Russia to save the world. If Russia didn't invade Ukraine, there would be no question of atomic confrontation in the first place here, okay? That'd be the first thing. Second thing, the current U.S. administration does not represent us as we proved in our election. The current administration does represent the American people because it's still got 2 months left in office. And even if you could say, mandate, I don't buy it. Donald Trump was not elected off of his foreign policy credo. He was not elected off of his credentials to actually end the war. It was something he braggadociously said as he beat his chest. Okay? Nobody voted for him for that and that reason alone. And if you did, you're part of a very small subsection of the population. People voted for him because there's been anti-incumbent elections all around the world, even though there's like better long-term economic indicators. Some of the short-term economic indicators, like for example, high amounts of credit card debt and otherwise, were not improving rapidly enough. And when you look at inflation, these are the types of things that I think impacted people to vote much more than, say, foreign policy, or even like unemployment or other indicators, but certainly foreign policy. And when you poll Americans, it ranks pretty low. So trying to say that Donald Trump has a mandate to go in there and change up everything on this because Americans do not support Ukraine anymore. This is nonsense. You poll Americans, they still support Ukraine. And if you get into the specifics of the ones who want a deal, none of them are saying just give the Russians everything, give them all what they want. There might be some, but very few. Please do not let these war hawks provoke you. I don't know how you, like, make a brand of, I'm macho, I'm brave, I'm strong, ooga booga, you know? But also, if somebody hits you, don't hit them back. Don't hit back, no hit back, not allowed. No, it's scary, Russia. Scary, Russia.
Corrupt, bankrupt.
Pathetic. It's honestly pathetic. It really is. When did the right become so self-hating? And this isn't the only example of this, by the way. I've seen other examples, and I talked about it on some other locations. KYCK Ling, thank you so much for the primer. I don't know how to say your name. Thank you. There was another example of this. Where was it? Let me bring it up. Let me bring up the other example I found of just the self-loathing I'm seeing on the right as of late. Look at this. At this point, Russia would be justified in attacking U.S. assets around the world. Obviously, I hope it doesn't happen, but the situation the Biden administration has put us all in. The Russians invaded. They started the war. Do we talk about this around the war in Iraq? Like in popular culture? There are things that the Saddam regime actually did to partially provoke the war. For example, being hush-hush and kind of murky about whether they have atomic weapons to retain leverage, that was not smart. In their mind, they thought, oh, well, then it would scare the... No. That did not work. That was not smart. It did not help at all. Okay? That did not help at all in dissuading an invasion. But we decided to invade. We were the ones who decided to invade. We went in there. You know, once combat casualties come home, like at some point, you got to point blame at people who make these decisions. They invaded. And then when you invaded, you should expect to be shot back at if you're on the border with them. People seem to be treating Russia special. But let me be clear. If Vietnam was on the west coast of the United States, they would have been firing missiles into the United States during the Vietnam War. We are separated by the world through our oceans. That's what's protected us from those types of attacks when we go to war, because we usually have to ship our boys overseas to do that. The Russians are fighting their neighbors, and their neighbors are taking advantage of the geographic reality, okay? And I don't care how pacifistic you want to be or how much of a pushover you want to be when it comes to the Russians, you can't deny the geographic reality. And when the Chechens did raids into Russia during the Chechen Wars, did that start World War III? Did that justify attacks on U.S. assets? What could you imagine this amount of just self-loathing of, it would be justified for the Russians to kill our troops because after Russia invading a country that they and we both agreed in return for Ukraine giving them their nukes they wouldn't invade, we are now assisting them as talked about in the memorandum they signed. And because we're following through on our commitments, they should kill American troops? Are you crazy? Are you crazy? You think it would be justified for the Russians to kill American soldiers? How do you call yourself an American, let alone like some rightoid who believes? This is like a gun YouTuber. This is a gun YouTuber. How are you going to get the basics of self-defense, but not expand that slightly? Expand that slightly. It's just, it's the self-loathing. It just hurts. It burns. It feels like heartburn in my chest. It's hard to swallow. It's hard to swallow. But of course, Tucker Carlson had to outdo everyone else and say that this is the most evil thing he's ever seen in his lifetime.
I think we're watching the most evil thing I've ever seen in my lifetime, which is the lame duck administration leaving the next administration with the world war, with the nuclear conflict, by allowing Ukraine, a proxy state of the United States, to strike within Russia. And I'll just have one editorial comment and then I'm going to let you go. But I think that people in Washington misunderstand Vladimir Putin and they think he's a monarch with absolute power, which is not true. And Russian politics is complex and it's lively. And Putin is very concerned with his approval rating within Russia. He cannot appear weak. That's a huge threat to him. He feels that. I can confirm. And if he can't hide attacks on him by the United States through Ukraine, either on Moscow or big civilian casualties, I think he will have no choice, in his view, but to launch like a serious response against Ukraine or NATO countries or possibly the United States. So this seems like the most reckless thing that's ever happened in my life.
I hardly have words for it. Let me just.
Am I overstating it? Do you think?
No, not even remotely.
No, we're all gonna die. We're all gonna die. Biden's just kill everyone. We're all gonna die. No, you're not overstating it. We're gonna be alive in 3 months, and then what? Then what? Then what? Okay. By the way, I see every time I hear someone say proxy state, I see my chat get a little lively, and usually the Ukrainians, oh, proxy state, screw up. It's immediately Ukrainians disregard you once you call them a proxy state, you take away their autonomy, you take away their ability to make decisions about their own country, choose their alliances. Yeah, you're acting like a colonial, and that's what he's doing. He's acting like a colonial. This is silly. This is silly. This is goofy. This is ridiculous. The fact we're taking this type of rhetoric seriously is embarrassing. It's embarrassing for our country. It's embarrassing for our political rhetoric. It's embarrassing for our geopolitical scene. The United States has so much resources. The United States has so much military power. The United States has so much diplomatic power. The United States has so much influence in Europe. If we just knew how to use it accurately and correctly, we could get so much done and not only supporting our allies, but achieving global goals. Like, for example, fighting climate change, etc. And of course, I don't think we're going to bomb climate change away with the military, but using our diplomatic power, using our influence, using our wealth, these are things we can do. But we have so much decision atrophy in the United States because dumb schmucks like this are dragging us through the mud, getting our gears clogged up with bullshit. As we have Marjorie Taylor Greene going on TV saying the Ukrainians are harvesting organs to sell them off to fund the war effort. They're just making up fairy tales. They could get an old book of English fairy tales, replaced like Goldilocks with Zelenskyy, and it would all be as accurate as what they're doing now. It's all nonsense. The most dangerous, the most evil thing you've seen in your lifetime. Okay, let me tell you a few more evil things. I just got back from Kherson, where the locals are referring, and the press, but also the locals, are referring to what's going on there as a human safari. Because every day, locals are dying because the Russians are deliberately targeting them with FPV drones and grenade drop munitions. I've talked to the victims, I've interviewed them, I've talked to the ambulance drivers who have been targeted, I've seen the footage of them being targeted, and you know why it's so easy to gather data on this? Just like when they bombed us, when we were doing the aid mission in Kherson after they blew up the dam, the Russians are releasing it all online. They're releasing all the footage online. The Russians, so when I get back from Kherson, and I'm talking to these babushkas that got blown up by FPV drones, and they're saying we're getting hunted in a human safari, and this happening every single day. And the Russians are posting videos of it. They're bragging about it. They love it. They love it. It's a joy to them. It's horrific. It's honestly some of the most disgusting stuff I've seen in this country. And I've seen some really horrific stuff in this country. That is one thing I've seen in the last week that is more evil than this. One thing. One thing I've seen that's more evil than this. Give me a month, I can show you 3. Give me a few more months, I can show you 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The targeting of children's hospitals in Kiev. The Izium death pits. The largest mass grave in Europe since World War II. Tucker never talks about this because it's not about evil. It's not about Christian or anti-Christian. If any of this had to do with Christianity, then Tucker would be talking about the persecution of Baptists in occupied territory, which has been going on for years. I was talking in Kherson with people who saw their churches get shut down when the Russians came in and occupied it. These are evil things. But what Tucker gets worked up about, what Tucker thinks is evil, is the right of the Ukrainians to defend themselves, which all states have the right to. That's the thing that's too evil for Tucker. The most evil thing he's seen in his lifetime. When he championed the invasion of Iraq, by the way. Oh, I will say, okay, before we move on to the left, there's still 2 more really funny righty responses I wanted to go through quick. Where is the other one? Oh, yes, where is the Charlie Kirk? Here it is. Here it is. Here's the 2 other responses I wanted to get through. Because I've seen different variations of this response, and the other one's just funny. So here's Charlie Kirk's. Biden is trying to start World War III. This is pathological and totally insane. Does he even know what pathological means? U.S. weaponry should not be used to fire into the interior of Russia. Imagine if Russia supplied missiles to fire into America. Okay, I don't know what he means by pathological. I think he's just using words like crazy. It's ambidextrous. It's mesothelioma. No. Okay, whatever. 2 things here. U.S. weaponry should not be used to fire into the interior of Russia. Already been happening. Sorry, maybe you didn't know about it. Sorry that I'm the one to inform you about this. But ever since the Russians invaded into Kharkiv and tried to expand the war again, even though that's how people talk about it, American weapons were approved to be fired over the border into the Kursk, into the Belgorod region that was being used to invade Kharkiv. And we got no response. The Russians expanded the war, we met them, we stopped their advance in the Kharkiv region, and then nothing happened. I mean, there was Gimlers being used, it destroyed some convoys, they were using artillery, and the Russians were using the restrictions that we placed upon Ukrainian weapons to their advantage, where they would take their artillery systems and keep them right across the Russian border, right outside of range for where they would be approved to use American weapons, and then firing from there, blatantly using it. And it was their own fault. They could have been more subtle about it. They could have not dragged so much attention to the fact that they were using these restrictions against the Ukrainians. They could have not approved the expansion of the war by opening up a new front and invading the Kharkiv region. I spent a lot of troops. I spent a lot of time with those troops up there, man. They fought hard, and the Russians lost a lot of men on that offensive. But they did it anyway because they wanted to open up a new front. And that was the response they got. And so we've been having American weapons firing into the interior of Russia, if that's what you want to call it, instead of across the border like a normal person. We've already been doing that, and it hasn't really gotten much of a response. Razclath, thank you so much for the primer. Now, this other thing, I've heard this a few times. Imagine if Russia supplied missiles to fire into America. Well, yeah, in isolation, that sounds crazy, right? But if the full story was America declared that Mexicans do not exist, and that Mexico is an extension of the United States, and it's connected to the Battle of the Alamo, who cares, right? Because Santa Anna was just, gave up America to whatever. Okay, that's their position. And then we invade, and in an attempt to just completely collapse the government and take it all over. Then we get bogged down for 3 years. 3 years. And we burn cities to the ground. We bomb children's hospitals. We bomb tons of civilians. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people die. Cause millions to be displaced. Impact international food prices. And all while going back on a previous commitment to stand by Mexico against people trying to go after their territory. And we're the ones now doing that. Under those circumstances, Russian supplied missiles hitting across the border within 300 kilometers range, so not even Washington, D.C., to hit, ammunition depots? Air bases? It's not like the Ukrainians have the missiles to spare to just randomly fire them into civilian areas for no reason. Yeah, under those conditions, I think us getting shot back at is to be expected. If we fought the Vietnam War, but Vietnam was on the coast of California, I think we could have expected more rocket attacks in the United States. The difference is that when we fight wars, we go across the sea to fight our enemies, and we make allies with those close at home, the Mexicans and the Canadians, make trade deals with them, because it's smart. It's strategically smart, and that's what we did. The Russians invade the Ukrainians. Geographic reality states that Ukraine has an interconnected highway system with Russia, and so the Russians fire at them, the Ukrainians fire back. It's called war. Tug on your nuts a little bit, okay? Sweetie? Jesus. Oh, the funniest response from Congress was this. Congressman Thomas Massey calls for President Biden's impeachment over allowing long-range... By the way, it's medium to long at best, okay? Missile strikes on Russian territory. By permitting strikes on Russia, Biden commits an unconstitutional act of war, endangering all Americans. This is an impeachable offense. I like that, Donald Trump stopping Congress from sending weapons to Ukraine, as was congressionally approved by a veto-proof majority, violating his constitutional oath of office in that way. No. That's not impeachable. Giving the Ukrainians permission to use weapons that have been congressionally approved to be sent over? No, that's impeachable. Because the Constitution means nothing. Constitution means nothing. It's just a bunch of gunk. A bunch of gunk.